Hi, I'm Dan Q, and you're listening to a podcast that nobody ever asked for, exclusively about things that only I find interesting. Today, I'll be talking about a piece of fiction that I've tried to write on a few occasions, but have now given up on. It turns out that the conspiracy theories that it tried to poke fun at feel a little too close to home in this era in which conspiracy theories aren't just something enjoyed by harmless nutjobs, but seem to be propagated by people with real political power. As usual, there's a blog post to accompany this episode. Today you'll find it at danq.link/fiction. Sadder than fiction. On a number of occasions over the first 2 decades of this century, I've attempted to write a particular short story with a science fiction or alternate history feel, and now I've given up on it. And that's fine. The story I've been trying to write has taken several different forms over the years, but the theme has always been the same. A crazy narrative spun by an isolated society turns out, incredibly, to be true. But ultimately the people who discover that fact choose to keep it a secret because the flawed lie they believe in is preferable to the instability and chaos that they fear would result if they revealed it. It taps into ideas about conspiracy theories and hidden worlds and the choices we have to make between living authentically or living comfortably. In its most concrete form, the short story covered the political aftermath of the capture by the DPRK of a fishing boat that had allegedly drifted into North Korean waters. North Korea in the story represents the country at its most isolationist and mysterious, and the captured trawler crew are surprised to experience Pyongyang, a socialist utopia, supported by futuristic technology, because it turns out in the story that North Korea's in-universe propaganda is true. They really are an advanced, self-reliant nation whose message of peace is being distorted by Western imperialist leaders. Insofar as that truth is known in the West, it's suppressed for fear that the Korean model represents a democratic, post-scarcity future that threatens to undermine the power of the oligarchs of the world. When the boat and those aboard it are repatriated, with the assumption that they'll act as ambassadors to the outside world, the crew are subjected to interrogations and cajoling by their home nations. They mustn't talk about what they saw north of the 38th parallel, they're told, with threats of imprisonment and violence if they do, and an offer of financial inducements for their compliance. But in the end, the most effective message for getting the wayward fisherfolk on side is their realisation that the world isn't ready for the truth. In a dialogue between the imprisoned seafarers, they agree that they should take the bribes and return quietly to their families, not for their own sake, but because they believe that telling their story would lead to a terrible war between two equally matched parties. On one side, a small nation armed with futuristic sci-fi weapons, and on the other, the might of the nuclear superpowers of the rest of the world. As a final twist, it's revealed that the captain of the vessel was actually a spy, aware of the truth the entire time, who allowed the boat to go off course with the aim of gathering information on the North Korean situation. The story finishes with the captain, having been instrumental in persuading the crew not to share what they saw, wavering in their own confidence and possibly being implied to be the author of the story. Rereading my notes and content I drafted, I've got to admit it's got a certain feel of Dr. Strangelove discovers Wakanda? Or maybe it's more like the Pueblo incident, but set in the world of They Live. In my notes somewhere I've got a concept I never explored for the story, which was that North Korea is under the control of a benevolent alien species trying to uplift humanity, while much of the rest of the developed world is under the influence of a malicious alien species who are using their position to push humans into terraforming Earth into something more suited to the aliens' needs. So something like the Forge of God, but with a climate change message. I never really worked on that idea because it felt like it was weaving too many concepts into what was supposed to be a tiny narrative. It might one day have been fun to finish, but now it's not. That nod to Dr. Strangelove is apt because my aim was to write something that looked farcically at the nature of political competition on the global scale in a world in which the zaniest possible conspiracy theory turned out to be true. Strangelove used the existence of a Project Sundial-style doomsday device as the surprise truth. I used the idea that DPRK propaganda might actually be more honest than the narratives of its rivals. In my off and on again long-running effort to pen the story, I last made any real effort back in about 2015-16. Since then, the entire concept hasn't been funny anymore. Today, the story would be less farce than lampoonery, and not in a good way. When I first envisaged the concept of the story, researching conspiracy theories meant laughing at flat earthers and picking holes in the arguments of the proponents of a moon landing hoax. For the most part, conspiracy theories used to seem ridiculous, but not dangerous. Obviously, I know there are exceptions to that, and I'm speaking from a position of privilege. For a long while, for example, conspiracy theories relating to Holocaust denialism have created real harm to people. And of course, there's for a long while been actual damage caused by folks who loudly subscribe to false beliefs about HIV or 9/11 or Sandy Hook or countless others. But in any case, for the most part, it feels like conspiracy theorists were just ridiculous idiots. But somewhere along the way from then to now, conspiracy theories have started becoming more mainstream, and that makes my story not fun anymore. Convicted felon Donald Trump loves to claim that a deep state cabal of leftists and big tech companies are suppressing his voice, or that immigrants are eating pets, or that the announcement of Osama bin Laden's death was timed carefully so people would watch news about that rather than his show's Celebrity Apprentice. Yes, really. It turns out that my story's comedy villain, the leader of the free world, who leverages enormous power to lie and manipulate everybody, isn't a laughing matter anymore. Perhaps I should try my hand at writing bleak dystopian fiction instead. Once again, this episode was based on a blog post where you'll find lots of links to supplementary materials, meme graphics, and all kinds of other fun. You can find it, if you like, at danq.link/fiction. If you've enjoyed today's episode, go over there and leave me a comment or email me on podcast@danq.me. And as always, Dan Q for listening. Dan Q very much.